This is a set of lectures on the medical museum, and we'll be thinking about what the relationship is between museums and medicine, art galleries and medicine. And one of the things we'll be thinking about is the difference between the normal and the pathological, or the normal and the monstrous, which is a term that was used historically when many medical museums that I'll refer to were being founded. So without further ado, here's the PowerPoint. Let's get started. Okay, the first thing really to think about is the relationship between art and anatomy, because that is the sort of foundation upon which these medical museums, or pathological museums as they sometimes were called, were founded. So art and anatomy has had a very long, a very rich, complex relationship stretching as far back as the classical period, but really beginning properly in Western civilization with the Renaissance, the early modern period. So I'll begin with this sculpture, we could call it. Properly, it's known as an écorché, which is a sculpture that has had of a figure that's had the skin and fat removed to reveal the muscles and some of the bone. Now, this is an écorché that was made right at the very beginning of the 19th century. In 1800, 3 artists that belonged to the Royal Academy got together and said, including the then president of the Royal Academy of Art, and said, you know, we need to properly see what a body that is hung on a crucifix looks like, because there's, you know, so there's this huge tradition of really, really important fundamental pieces of art in this long history that are really showing us the narrative of Jesus' crucifixion. All this Italian art, all this Northern European art is really about this story, and the centerpiece of the story is, of course, Christ on the cross. I just noticed that my audio is way down, so I'm just gonna put it up a little bit. Hopefully it's not too bad. There we go. And so they got together with a surgeon, an anatomist by the name of Carpew, and they said, you know, when you next have a body, could we get together? Could you, as soon as possible, put this body up on a crucifixion? Could we flay it and see what it looks like? Could we have a model from which students could learn at the Royal Academy about how to properly represent the human body? So in 1801, the opportunity arose when an elderly gentleman was found guilty of killing his neighbor, who he had challenged to a duel. And in those days, when a criminal was put to death, or someone that was convicted of a crime, they weren't always criminals, and in this case probably this poor man by the name of Legge was suffering from dementia, but at any rate he was sentenced and put to death. And so the surgeon and the artist got together and they took the body fresh down from the gallows, and they stripped the body of its skin and fat and hung it and made a model, or made 2 models in fact of it. So that is a story that is maybe not, you know, the nicest Saturday story, but it is a sort of episode in history that tells us about the relationship between art and anatomy. And I think it's important for us to have a sense of how close that relationship is. So with that in mind, I'm going to sort of bring us forward a little bit and just call attention to an equally long, equally complex history of writers thinking about the body, thinking about our relationship to the body, thinking about representing it, thinking about the body in art, thinking about parts of the body being on display in museums, which many medical museums do have. And you can think back to Nietzsche, who, the philosopher who thought, like, what is our relationship to the body? And how can we truly understand what it means to be human if we don't understand even how the interior of our body works? Does not nature keep secret from us, most things, even about our bodies? Example, the convolutions of the intestines, the quick flow of the blood currents, the intricate vibrations of the fibers, so as to banish and lock him up in proud delusive knowledge. We can never fully understand who or what we are if we can't even understand how, our nerves work. Now, more recently, William Ewing has written a couple decades ago in a book called The Body. He was calling attention to how the body has really come front and center in theory, literary criticism, art criticism, and he sort of makes no apologies for the fact that the body is in fashion, because he says what puts the body squarely in the center of debate is not fashion, but it's an urgency. The body is being rethought and reconsidered by artists and writers because it is being restructured and reconstituted by scientists and engineers. There are so many things happening to us, happening to our bodies, that now is really a time that we should rethink or think even more deeply all kinds of issues surrounding the body. And I would say, obviously the last couple of not the last couple of months, the last year shows us how urgent thinking about our body, and not just our body, but about animal bodies, other living things, and their bodies, and our relationship to them. Okay, so with just those kind of floating ideas, I want to move on now to get to some specific themes that you might want to think about in your own projects. So one is the culture of collecting. Just as we had, from the 18th century, 19th century, all these connoisseurs who collected books for their libraries, who collected art for their galleries, and collected all kinds of objects from around the world for their curiosity cabinets or cabinets of curiosity. So too was the body collected, and things having to do with the body. And one of the things I want to emphasize is how the aesthetic gaze really comes together with the anatomical or the bodily or the autoptic to see penetratively into the body. How these gazes all become sort of bound up with each other in the 18th and really strongly in the 19th centuries. I want to adjust that. I'm hoping that the sound is good. Okay, I'm just going to put it up a little bit more. So here is a photograph of a 19th century museum of anatomy. You can see the bones and skulls there. You can see in the top bit the jars that would have real specimens taken from bodies and preserved. There's some very famous ones that you may be interested in. This is the one from in Florence, La Specola, with the wax anatomical bodies you see there, body parts. They look very real. We'll come back to these, but they're not. They're wax made to look real. Oh, this is a terrible photo I just see, but anyway, never mind. You can Google it and or go there sometime soon, hopefully. This is the Hunterian Museum in London. There's a Hunterian in Glasgow as well. So there's all kinds of jars of specimens. This was the collection, as a lot of these museums are, the collection of one individual who bequeathed their collections, and they've grown. This one from the very famous anatomist, obstetrician, William Hunter. Okay, and the medical and artistic gaze, thinking about that a little closer, really think about how anatomists have a vision that is like the vision of a connoisseur. So that is, you know, there's all kinds of images, paintings and caricatures of connoisseurs of the 18th and 19th centuries who are looking at all these, you know, sculptures of Venus de Milo, all of these paintings of biblical women, like Bathsheba being spied on by David, or Susanna being spied on by the elders. So this gaze that looks at art and that gets a certain pleasure from looking at bodies, sometimes naked men, but most often naked women's bodies, and in this way that combines pleasure, lust, desire with this penetrative vision that is autoptic or dissective, that wants to get beneath the skin. These things really come together. The anatomist's gaze and the connoisseur's gaze, or the artist's gaze, come together. And often the anatomist is a connoisseur, or often an anatomist is an artist who does his own illustrations or wax models. This is another wax model from Barcelona. It's not particularly good condition, but it gives you a sense of how, to our eyes, some of the objects in these museums might make for slightly uncomfortable viewing. Like, why does she have, you know, why is this a beautiful woman with these very pert bosom, pearls and real hair, or hair that looks to be real, on this kind of bed, when this is supposed to be showing us something as anatomy, which is supposed to be, you know, straightforwardly, and it had this distanced gaze, this sort of professional gaze. But instead, these are, you know, we've got things here that we wouldn't put together with an anatomical model. Here's just an example of another one made out of different materials. This is not wax. This is terracotta, painted, and this is La Specula again, giving you just another view, because just drawing attention to this collection specifically because it's such a very good collection in a lot of ways. As you can see, the workmanship is absolutely brilliant on these ceroplasts. They're called wax models. Very lifelike. The skin is supposed to replicate skin, and it does here in a way. It's got this sheen to it. It's got this sense of pliability. It's almost as if it's sweating and breathing. But this woman whose body is open and showing us a fetus curled up inside her womb has this expression, which you may want to interpret for yourself, but, you know, could be seen as an expression of pleasure. Again, pearls. These ones very often had real hair, made to look real in a lot of ways, and posed on their silk beds in very sort of come hither or pleasurable or seductive kind of poses. Sorry, these images are not very good. I should have used my own. These are from the web. So here's an example. If you look at this without seeing the inside, she looks very, you know, like this kind of, almost like a sex doll. And I should say that some of these also, they are closed, their body is closed like a sex doll, and you can take the bits off. So you would remove the skin, you'd remove the fat and muscles, remove, you know, certain organs, getting right down to the reproductive organs. And you can close the body back up and open the body. Now, it's worth mentioning there are also male models, but they are typically exhibited or displayed in different ways. Most often standing, for instance, and not typically in what we'd call or think of as a sexualized kind of pose. Okay, so I'm going to leave that first part there and return for a second lecture thinking about the not the beautiful anatomical body, but the pathological anatomical body in some of these collections. See you soon.